Space Marine lieutenants act as the second-in-command to captains, and when they wear their Vanguard Phobos armor, they do all of that, but they do it extra sneaky-like. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to another video where today we are covering the Phobos Lieutenant in, Phobos Lieutenant. I suppose that sums it up pretty well. Lieutenant in Phobos armor is its full name, though I will be calling him the Phobos Lieutenant from here on out. So, the Phobos Lieutenant comes in at a rock-bottom price of 55 points. He has the standard Space Marine stat line for a light character, movement 6 inches, toughness 4, save 3+, 4 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 1. This is standard enough, though at 55 points, that's a pretty good deal. He comes with a bolt pistol and master-crafted scoped bolt carbine. The bolt pistol is one attack, hits on 2s at 12-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. The master-crafted bolt carbine is 2 attacks, a hit on 2s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 2. The low AP is a bit of a problem, but there is still the good, solid enough chance that you could kill a Space Marine. Then in terms of melee weapons, he has his paired blades, much like the Incursors. He has sustained hits 1 with 5 attacks, a hit on 2s at strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. This is pretty much just good for killing light infantry, though it's not necessarily the worst profile in the world to take on buffs, especially those that affect AP. Then, in terms of core abilities, he has Infiltrator's Deep Strike Scout 6 inches, as well as Tactical Precision, so while leading a unit, the weapons in that unit gain lethal hit, standard Lieutenant buff, but very impactful for the Phobos units as they tend to be quite low damage. Then he has Fire and Fade. After this model's unit has fired, they can move D6 inches in the shooting phase. This has some very interesting tech alongside some of his leader options. So going over his stats one more time, he has the standard Space Marine stat line, though at a slight bargain. He's one of the cheapest characters in the Codex. I think only cheaper than him is the Blade Guard Ancient. His ranged damage is fairly so-so. His melee damage is good against light infantry, and with just a little bit of buffs, he can be really good against medium infantry as well. Then, in terms of abilities, with Infiltrators, Deep Strike, and Scouts, he can lead all of the Phobos units with no restrictions. And then, of course, Lethal Hits is always strong, and Fire and Fade allows, as I mentioned, for a very interesting ability alongside the Reavers, who this is really the main way to make Reavers a somewhat efficient unit. And speaking of, we're going to now cover his leader options. So, Incursors have fine melee damage, and their buffing rule is always solid to give your army +1 to hit. However, I'd say that if you're bringing them, it's probably better to just bring them as Reavers. We'll get to that in a second, though. The Incursors are, of course, a fine option, though, just to get some presence on the mid-board. I'd say Infiltrators don't really have a reason to take this guy, as the Infiltrators, despite their name, don't really want to infiltrate and generally want to sit on your home field objective, protecting it from Deep Strikers. Bring a Phobos Librarian for them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Reavers are, I'd say, the best option for this guy to lead, which isn't saying that much, but I think in the right hands, this could be a very devastating combo. So the reason that this is so devastating is his normal move happens in the shooting phase, and obviously if you Deep Strike, as the Reavers do have Deep Strike with their Grav shoots, obviously this guy has a huge benefit. You just pop off a shot at any enemy target, and then you move D6 inches towards whatever you want to charge, and then charge. However, there are some issues, mainly the low AP of this strat. That's why I recommend mainly using it in places like Gladius Task Force, where they can get extra AP for just an extra CP, which is really not too bad, especially if you're bringing someone who generates CP, whether it be Azrael, and I believe Marnius Calgar does as well. So out of the three, as I mentioned, I think Infiltrators are pretty pointless to bring this guy with. Incursors are a fine option if you want to use Scouts, though if you really want some interesting tech that could seriously catch people off guard, bring the Reavers. As I mentioned, Deep Strike within 9 inches, fire off a couple shots, and then they can move up to 6 inches right towards the enemy that they want to get, probably the backfield objective camper, and then charge them. With this guy and 1 CP, you are on odds on to kill a squad of 5 Space Marines, which is of course very useful to then swipe the objective out from behind your enemy's back and put them on the back foot immediately. In terms of detachments, and Gladius is of course the take-all-comers detachment, and of course this is a place where he shines. He really enjoys the Honor Vehement, as well as Honor the Chapter for +1 to wound and AP. The main reason is Honor Vehement brings him up to Strength 6 in Assault Doctrine, and then with +1 to wound, that means he's wounding most types of infantry on a 2+, and with the AP it does mean he does do slightly better against the likes of Space Marines. This is a very solid detachment for him, and is probably the main place I'd actually run him. And then in the Storm Siege Anvil, the Feel No Pain enhancement is solid enough. This would make them much tougher on the backfield objective they're probably going to steal, though I would say nothing is standing out from there. Then Iron Storm is similar, no specific buffs for this guy. However, having something that could swipe the backfield objective could be very solid for an army full of tanks. Firestorm, nothing to stand out, though they do have access to a +1 to wound strat. However, I don't think he's particularly standout in Firestorm, as you're probably going to be running a lot of infantry anyway. Stormlance, +1 to wound and reroll charges is solid. The AP strength enhancement is also very nice, just to make his combat a little bit better to help him deal with slightly tougher backfield campers. Vanguard, despite the fact that it is the stealthy Space Marine detachment, lacks any specific buffs for this guy. None of the enhancements are particularly interesting on him, and most of the stratagems actually favor range to melee. Though, of course, if you're running a theme, like Fluffy Vanguard list, a unit swooping into the backfield to steal their home objective is very on theme, and I don't think he would be bad there. I think he would be solid in all of these, by the way. Then, in the First Company Task Force, if you give him the Fear-Made Manifest, you can have an interesting tech where you obviously group up with the Reavers, charge into something, they take Battle Shock, then they take D3 Mortal Wounds if they fail it. A slightly cheesy strat, but does have some use in making sure they clear off that backfield objective. So as I've already covered in a sort of recap, we're going to cover a best use scenario. The Phobos Lieutenant is dirt cheap. 55 points is very, very cheap for the buffs he gives to his units, and most of the units he leads are pretty cheap. With Reavers, it would be 145 points, if I'm not mistaken, which is very cheap for something that has the risk to steal a backfield objective. Now, this will not be totally universal, but his damage is, again, solid enough to take a 5-man Space Marine squad out, and of course anything lighter is really not going to want to get in melee with these guys, as they're quite savage against low toughness enemies. However, they could struggle against something like Custodes holding their backfield if they're not running Sisters of Silence, like I don't. But then they could also just go jump into a table quarter for engage on all fronts, or something along those lines. Overall, I'd say that he is a very useful unit, but you do need to have a plan to use him, and make sure you actually know what he can take on. Because if you charge this guy into something he's going to bounce off of, you're just going to lose 150 points of your army. But if you know what fights to take, and which parts of the board are the most important part to take, having a unit that has an almost guaranteed deep strike charge is extremely useful, especially against armies that are elite but quite fragile, like something like Sisters, as these guys would rip a Sister squad apart with very little problems, especially in Gladius with the extra AP and +1 to wound. They would be ripping them apart. Though, of course, these guys aren't really going to be taking down any tanks or anything, so if you are bringing them, this is a given, but make sure you have ample firepower before you include these guys, because if these guys take the backfield objective and then a Lehman Rush just turns around and blows them up, there's not much use in that. Make sure to Alpha Strike hard, and these guys can help you wrap up the game. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me what you thought of this slightly longer form down below in the comments. See you all next time for some Space Marine 2 content.